SVC Media.
Welcome to the iGaming Daily Podcast, analysing the news from the betting and gaming industry all over the globe, supported by Optimove, the #1 CRM marketing solution for the iGaming market.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the iGaming Daily Podcast, your go-to podcast for all the latest updates, insights and discussions on the ever-evolving world of iGaming and gambling regulations. Today we're diving into a significant shift in the UK gambling landscape as operators brace for new regulatory changes set to take effect this April. At the heart of this transformation is the newly confirmed RET Statutory Levy, designed to fund research, education and treatment, otherwise known as RET, for problem gambling. With the first payment due in October, stakeholders across the industry are now preparing for its impact. But that's not all. Changes to online slot stake limits, land-based casino regulations, and a renewed focus on gambling advertisement are also making headlines. And with Baroness Tycross reaffirming the government's commitment to tackling illegal gambling, what does all of this mean for operators, players, and the industry at large? Joining me, James Ross, is Ted Menmuir, who will help break down what these changes mean, how businesses can prepare, and what the future of UK gambling regulation might look like. Ted, welcome. How are you doing?
Fine, James. Fantastic. Glad to be here on a Monday.
Yeah, it's a good way to start the week. It's a heavy story. You worked on this towards the end of last week. I believe it was Thursday or Friday. And it's big updates. It's one that you've been itching for, to be honest, for quite a while.
Itching for, yeah. This is...
Yeah, no, it's big. We're going to dive into it. Before we do, it's always nice to mention the supporter of the iGaming Day podcast, and that is Optimove, the #1 CRM solution for the iGaming market. Optimove, we love you, and thank you for being our supporter. Ted.
Yes, James.
Let's jump on this now. Let's dive into it, because the introduction of the RET Levy marks, like I've said in the introduction, a major shift within the industry now. How do you... Well, first of all, just delve into kind of the updates that Baroness Tycross brought to the Betting and Gaming Council.
On Thursday, Baroness Tycross, she led the speech at the Betting and Gaming Council's annual meeting, and she confirmed the Labour government schedule that the RET Levy and online slots will be applied. So the RET Levy will be applied from the 6th of April, with first payments inbound from October. And the online slots, the online stake limits will be applied from £5 and £2 from the 21st of May. Those were two kind of major announcements to give at the AGM. It is, to an extent, it is something that the industry has been preparing for over the last year or so. Especially with regards to kind of online slots that will kind of bring priority with what's on the high street. But we're kind of going towards the kind of unknown in the industry with a new system being applied to to safer gambling and proper gambling harms. And it's really now up to, I think, everyone involved to kind of coordinate it and see how it goes. It's way too early to judge whether this is the right system or not to be applied to something as complex as gambling addiction.
Yeah, you said you don't know if it's the right method to go with or not. But what I've liked is in the previous government, in the Conservative government, everything felt at a snail pace, and there was so many eyes over this during the kind of research phase. Now, since Labour have come in, I'll let the viewers decide from the UK if they've done a good job or not in the first 6 months, but what has been nice is there's been quite a lot of fast action on this. We seem to be getting a lot more updates, but when it actually comes to this being implemented, how do you kind of see this impacting operators, and not just the big ones, like the small ones as well?
Okay. Well, yeah, look, we're going through a period of transition, and I think you're right with how you kind of framed it, as in things are getting done. And I think when you look at let's start with the RET Levy. This is very much a case of it does what it says on the tin. And by that, it's the overall kind of guarantee that there will be £100 million guaranteed for problem gambling, research, education, and treatment, in which also what the government has kind of factored in is the fact that it now has kind of an arm's length away from the industry and how kind of that funding is applied. And the structure there is that the NHS is the lead commissioner with 50%, and then it's supported by the Office for Health and Improvement of Disparities that will serve as the prevention commissioner, geared towards kind of research, and them getting 30%, and then the kind of extra 20% is geared towards the UK Research and Innovation Department. So it's a new structure. I think the government has kind of like ticked the boxes of what it wanted. It's now time for it to be applied.
And you've just gone through the tier structure there, and that is based on the gross gambling yields, the GGY. Do you think this levy is proportionate and fair across those sectors?
It's a wider levy now, and will feature a contribution from any licensed business in the UK, regardless of what activity it's featured in, and also discipline, whether it's B2C or B2B. So again, this is this is taking on the government's approach that everyone has to be committed towards fighting gambling addiction and gambling harms. And many people call this a ticking boxes exercise. I kind of don't view it that way. I think that there is a basis for every license contributing to problem gambling. The feedback, it kind of divides the industry. Some say that, okay, but what's it really going to change? The majority of the funding will still come from your top 5 operators. They will be kind of, and then it's what can the long tail really provide to that, right? And also, what is the accountability there? Again, I think it's something that really kind of divides opinion.
And you've already mentioned that the NHS, they're going to take that central role in distributing the funds. People in the NHS, or people in the UK, sorry, are very, very aware how the current state of the NHS is in terms of being overly stretched, understaffed, and there seems to be what would you call them? Maybe one of the better word, kind of protest or strike. Strike's probably good. Strike's quite a lot. So when it actually comes to the NHS, is there that believability from the industry that they can distribute this fairly, have the resources capable to manage this, and how might this actually change the approach to problem gambling treatment and prevention?
So here's where you get the concerns and anxieties about the new system, and one being about the NHS's kind of first steps of taking over the RET Levy, and also how it will treat, and it's not only the NHS, but the other departments of the OHID and UKRI, it's how they're going to treat kind of the third sector that was already involved and that already kind of provided kind of frontline services for treatment support of problem gambling. So how is it going to kind of rectify this network that already existed and that already has kind of its capabilities and competencies within, I think, smaller organizations that might be kind of independent, might move faster. And also, I think kind of reflecting back to the network that was created, it was quite centralized within GambleAware, and that's kind of been taken out. But GambleAware is still here. So that's another kind of area that has to be looked at. How are kind of old stakeholders going to be treated? And it's a concern that's happened throughout the debate of this. I mean, reflecting back on the process of how we got here, the amount of times that we, in the consultation period, someone raised up these issues, did come to light.
One of the things as well that was mentioned in the article that you wrote, Ted, which I'll leave a link in the description for the listeners to check out, and I already mentioned in the introduction, is the change to online stake limits. They've now been brought in line, or they will be brought in line with the retail counterpart. So it's £5 for adults, those 25 or over, and then £2 for those between ages 18 and 24. Do you think these measures will kind of achieve the government's goal in bringing parity between the online and retail space? There's no arguing that online is is where everyone goes. The retail space in itself is, again, want a better phrase, a dying breed.
And a different type of customer too.
Yeah, exactly. A different experience altogether.
Look, I think that's the acid test for any regulation.
Mm-hmm.
And the government, and it's not just the Labour government, it's the Conservative government, it's the reformists who believe that, they clearly viewed online slots as a category as being the highest risk.
Mm-hmm.
But their view of kind of taming it or kind of reducing exposure is to apply limits. I think a lot of kind of this was factored in by, yes, they want priority with the high street, but also there's a lot of kind of accountability of they want younger players to kind of, especially at the key age, about under 24s, not to engage with this category. So yes, they can engage with sports betting, they can engage with poker, but slots is kind of viewed as a no-no. We're not just seeing this in the UK. I think we've seen this play out in the Netherlands, in Spain as well. It's down to really, your view of the regulation. Does putting a limit really put these customers off from playing?
Yeah. First off, I just want to say it's weird hearing the Reform as the third biggest party you mentioned in the UK, not the Lib Dems.
No, by reform, I mean reformists.
Oh, right. Sorry, I thought you meant the Reform Party.
No, not Nigel and Co. Yeah.
No, you raise an interesting point as well, slots, and kind of, be the biggest risk factor. We recently did a story on the Balatro poker game, which had its reclassified. Well, its PEGI rating was reclassified to 12 plus instead of 18, and another game on that was Luck Be a Landlord, which has the skin and everything surrounded about it being a slot title. And that same argument there is you're introducing kind of young people to these slot mechanics or these slot visuals at best. So yeah, it's these new introductions on the face of it sound good. The one thing I would kind of factor in though is maybe from a UK affiliate space, we already seen, because there was a raft of changes coming in previously to set some limits on online slots, a lot of the UK based streamers moving out of the country to then stream slots in another country to not have these limits, and then also maybe not target the UK audience, but still getting the UK audience in there. So it'd be interesting to see just how big of an impact
I think
you say RET, I say RET. Potato.
Look, I think the RET. I think if you're a DCMS and you're looking at what's being implemented, and especially the Gambling Commission too, I think you're going to look at RET, and the RET Levy is going to play out. I think that's fixed.
Mm-hmm.
But I think in terms of the gambling regulations for online slots, I think that there could be kind of a movement there to either maybe increase the limits or maybe kind of just revise it or just test it out over a period of 6 to 8 months.
Mm-hmm.
The reason being is that actually, like, it's not technically that hard to apply, right? So it is kind of a changeable restriction. It's just telling the operators to fix the limits on the slots, whilst you're not kind of taking a whole kind of review of a system on board, are you? So I think that if, for the sector, I think that the sector should kind of keep open mind on this and not just believe that this is fixed forever.
We're going to take a quick ad break, and when we come back, we're going to go over kind of the role of advertising and sponsorship and tackling illegal gambling and consumer protection. So, see you soon.
SBC Summit Rio is back from the 25th to the 27th of February. Join us at Rio Centro for Brazil's biggest betting and iGaming event. Get your tickets now at sbcevents.com.
Welcome back. Right. As mentioned, Ted, we're going to be talking about role of advertising sponsorship and tackling illegal gambling and consumer protection. We'll start with advertising first, because Baroness Towncross acknowledged growing concerns over gambling advertising.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think the industry is doing enough now to self-regulate, or is there further government intervention? Is that an inevitable process that we're going to see?
I think from a speech, it's very much kind of, this is up in the air. And the kind of view here is that I think if the government are kind of giving the final straw to the sector to say, look, you decide the standards, you come back to us, and if we feel that this is not good enough, then we'll take care of it. It's what she said, basically. It's at a point that, okay, we're not necessarily, we know the reformist concerns, but it's up to the industry to really show that they can act and that they can put some barriers and some parameters, especially to advertising coverage, especially to what's being marketed and conduct.
I mean, we're already set to look at front of shirt sponsorship bans. I believe it's not next year, it's the year after. Am I correct?
Yeah.
Yep. And you also did a story last week on kind of Italy's potential U-turn on their sports sponsorship ban when it comes to gambling, which is an interesting insight to see. I know Spain's outright banned it as well. What are the kind of potential consequences of strict advertising controls that we've potentially seen in these other countries, and along with the media partnerships as well, not just obviously stadium sponsorships and stuff?
Look, I think in terms of advertising, the UK is very unique in how it's structured, especially with the cap and B cap. And actually, if we refer back to kind of consultations, what CAP always said is that they have designed a code specifically for this, and it works because they can look at kind of individual infringements on a basis. And this idea that, just creating kind of steady, fixed regulations works for advertising, they're against. So one of the things that I think carries kind of favour with the advertising debate in the UK is that you've got two bodies who are essentially kind of designed to monitor all forms of advertising, whether it be gambling or insurance or food standards, and they're very good at it. And they're very good at pointing out as the ones saying, like, look, these are the rules. If you, apply them or don't apply them, but you will receive fines. Now, the ministers have been told, right, like they want, the CAP feedback on what should be done. And the CAP and B cap have just said, well, look, the system is working. Where the cautions is in terms of the kind of parameters of advertising volume, especially around kind of football coverage. Especially around kind of sports coverage, prime time. How can that kind of be reduced? And that is really now going back to the operators and saying, you've got to come up with something.
Yeah, I think my only concern is with potential strict advertising controls is, and again, this is just from a UK perspective, and mainly even just from a football perspective, is gambling sponsorship, advertisement, partnerships make up a strong foundation for the whole football pyramid. Just forget about the Premier League and potentially even the Championship. Those League One and League Two divisions, gambling is kind of, I don't know the figure behind it, but that's their foundation for growth and financial income. If you strip that away, if you make it stricter and tighter, less visible, less chance to advertise, you then risk the destabilization of that football pyramid. And I don't see another sector coming in to replace what the gambling industry provide the football pyramid in the UK.
Yeah, but I mean, to do that, it's again, we're entering another period where we're soon going to have the Premier League report. Who are the Premier League are forcing the clubs to submit reports on the gambling sponsorships. They're now going to be more community focused and have to actually serve a purpose. This idea that sponsorships aren't monitored is not true, and like to a certain extent, like the bad sponsorships in football always kind of tend to be kicked out. We've seen this. So we've seen kind of these failures happen over time. They are, they do kind of bring the game into disrepute, but it's more about the actual sponsorships that were formed by the clubs themselves. My view here is that I don't think anyone in the government wants to pursue a blanket ban on gambling, but what it wants to see is kind of stronger parameters and also kind of restrictions on what kind of messaging can be said to the public and also whereabouts. I think this is much more towards let's reduce the volume, let's reduce the coverage, but also kind of, can we actually be better at advertising gambling than we currently are?
Mm-hmm. You mentioned the word strengthening there, and that's going to be kind of the core topic for the final conversation that we're going to have. And that's related to the crime policing bill, which aims to strengthen the Gambling Commission's powers in cracking down on illegal operators. Do you think these measures will be effective? And can you just explain the potential measures that were introduced by Baroness Tycross, sorry.
So, it's funny because now one of the main kind of concerns that we've seen come in is how do you tackle the black market? And it's not just, I think that this is now kind of not only just being voiced in industry ranks, but in political ranks too. And I think Baroness Tycross stated that, look, concerns are now kind of being interplayed with the crime and policing bill, which gives kind of regulatory authorities such as the UKGCs the rights to kind of target websites, IP block, and then demand kind of a cancellation of transactions if they view that, if they view kind of an illegal entity targeting UK consumers. It's something actually that the UKGC haven't had to date, which I'm quite surprised about. Again, I think she kind of concluded Thursday's speech by saying that we are seeing kind of a regulatory shift in policy. That's true, right?
Mm-hmm.
But overall, what the government wants to see is kind of safer gambling environments, but that really is kind of a two-way street, and they're aware of it, that there has to be kind of a collaborative approach between the industry and the regulator and the government. And I think that it's good that we have a government that's kind of much more aware of that. The interplay is all round, that, gambling just doesn't operate on its own. You need an input from all sorts of bodies and the police too.
Mm-hmm.
And again, like one of the things about the crime bill is that there's a much bigger focus now on kind of cybercrime, identity theft, stuff like that. So I think those kind of interplays are now going to come in with our overall kind of the overall debate of UK gambling.
Mm-hmm.
And then the funny thing is how kind of regulatory matters always play out, because you think you're going to a fixed point, but everything just always kind of unwinds away again. And that's kind of the nature of regulatory development, isn't it?
It is. And I'm not going to ask you how big of a threat does illegal gambling pose to licensed operators. We know they're a threat. There's no clear way about it. There's no doubt in it. But what I do want to ask you is kind of what steps do you think the industry should take to ensure that regulation doesn't drive more players towards that unlicensed platform?
Good question. I think 2025 is a year of transition. It's a year of kind of applying. We're going to see how the operators react to kind of new laws. And I think that, look, from my perspective, you got a lot, but we got a lot better at taking care of the customer and intervening there. The problem is, I think that you have to have a competitive product and one that actually stands. And I think what we've seen in other markets, which, I'm grateful that the UK is not part of that. But if you take a look at Germany, and you've got, real high limits on low limits on slots and stakings, deposit thresholds, universal checks, right? That's the stuff that really drives the customer to the black market. And you're now talking about the black market kind of intertwined with new developments, kind of crypto, and I think, you're looking at a new period of kind of exposure of the consumer himself.
Perfect. That's kind of all we've got time for, Ted. For the listeners out there, I will be attending the Deal Me Out conference, so you'll hear more about that because it's going to be on the black market prevention later on in the week on iGaming Daily and what me and a few colleagues experienced from the show. But apart from that, this has been iGaming Daily. I'll leave all the links in the description below on everything we've talked about today. Apart from that, have a good rest of the week.
Thank you for listening to today's iGaming Daily podcast, supported by Optimove, the #1 CRM marketing solution for the iGaming market. If you want to find out more about some of the subjects raised today, feel free to explore any of the sites in the SBC News network or check out the latest edition of the SBC Leaders magazine. Happy reading.